Story 1. Mirror Demons. The story begins with a young woman named Emily, who works as an interior designer, recently moving into an old house in a small town. She has just gotten divorced, trying to start a new life away from the hustle and bustle of the big city. Emily has always been interested in antiques, so her house is filled with various old things that she collects at flea markets and antique shops. One day, she finds an unusual mirror in a small antique shop in the city center that caught her attention. The mirror was large with a massive wooden frame covered in intricate carvings. It was covered in dust and cobwebs and had clearly been in the store for a long time. The salesman, an older man, warned her that the mirror carried a dark history, but Emily just smiled. She thought such warnings were just a marketing ploy. The design of the mirror that she liked was more important than any old legends, and she bought it at a reduced price. First day, Emily brought the mirror home and decided to hang it in her bedroom. That evening, before going to bed, she noticed that her reflection in the mirror looked a little strange. It seemed to her that the reflection was following her movements a little slowly, as if with a delay. She attributed it to fatigue and went to bed. Second day. The next day, Emily noticed something strange about her reflection as she passed a mirror. She raised her hand, but her reflection seemed to hesitate for a split second, repeating her movement. She tried to find any flaws in the glass, but she didn't notice anything special. The longer she looked at her reflection, the more uncomfortable she became. It felt like her reflection was looking at her a little differently than it should. Emily decided to ignore it and went to work. Day 3. On the third day, things started to get worse. When she returned home in the evening, she saw that her reflection wasn't just lingering, it looked really gloomy. The eyes in the reflection seemed a little deeper and darker. Emily decided that she was imagining things because she was tired. She went to the bathroom, but when she returned to the bedroom, it seemed to her that the reflection had changed even more. It was smiling. However, she knew for sure that she wasn't smiling. Emily felt panic rising in her. She stepped back from the mirror, trying to remember if something like this had happened before. She decided to cover the mirror with a large blanket and stop looking at it. A week later, a week passed. Emily became increasingly disturbed by the mirror and began to search for information about its origin. She found old city archives and found out that the mirror belonged to a wealthy family, all of whom died under strange circumstances about 100 years ago. Legend had it that the dead mistress of the house was found sitting in front of the mirror. It was said that a demon lurked in the mirror, luring its victims by manipulating their reflections. Emily began to feel worse. She couldn't sleep, often woke up in a cold sweat, and it seemed to her that the mirror was literally calling her. One night, she again heard a strange whisper coming from under the coverlet that covered the mirror. She came closer to it and felt a cold air coming from the glass. When she removed the coverlet, she saw her reflection, but this time it looked alive, as if it was not her, but someone else. Nightmare night. One night, when Emily could no longer hold back, something pushed her to get up and go to the mirror. She saw her reflection smile at her and raise its hand, although Emily herself remained motionless. In horror, she wanted to turn away, but her feet seemed to be rooted to the floor. Suddenly, her reflection began to whisper to her in an unfamiliar language, the sound of which resembled crackling and hissing. Emily felt herself being pulled toward the mirror. The reflection suddenly stepped forward and stretched out its hand as if trying to get out into this world. Panic seized her, but she could not look away. It was as if her own will was being suppressed. Suddenly, she felt herself being pulled into the mirror. Her reflection opened its mouth wider and wider, as if laughing, and her body began to move on its own. She screamed, but her scream was silent. She felt herself being pulled into the mirror, and at the last moment she managed to break eye contact and collapse to the floor. Consequences, Emily was never the same again. She couldn't look in the mirror anymore. She called the old salesman and demanded that he take the mirror back, but he refused, saying that it was hers now. After that, her phone calls stopped and the store was closed forever. Emily decided to get rid of the mirror herself. She took it outside and tried to smash it with a hammer. But the mirror wouldn't break. With each blow, she thought she heard muffled screams and whispers coming from inside. In desperation, she buried it deep in the woods, hoping to get rid of this nightmare forever. But after a few days, the mirror reappeared in her bedroom, in the same place. Emily realized that she couldn't escape it. She began to notice that her reflection no longer simply repeated her movements. It looked a little different, as if it were something or someone that had taken on her appearance. The story ends with her friends discovering one day that Emily has disappeared. Only a mirror was found in her bedroom, and when they looked into it, they saw her, but not the real Emily. The reflection was ominously smiling and full of darkness. Story 2: Faceless Neighbors. A man named Michael, who had recently ended a long and intense relationship, decided to start his life with a clean slate. He left his noisy city neighborhood and moved to a small house in the suburbs. The new house was in a quiet old neighborhood with narrow streets and thick trees that cast long shadows on the deserted sidewalks. Immediately after moving in, Michael felt a strange atmosphere. The area seemed abandoned, as if time had stood still there. First day. On his first day, Michael unpacked the boxes and set up the house. The house was old but cozy, with wooden floors and large windows. He decided to go outside to check out the neighborhood. However, he noticed that he barely saw his neighbors. There were several houses in the area, but they all looked as if no one had lived in them for a long time. Abandoned yards, boarded-up windows, peeling paint on the facades, all this created the impression that Michael was in a God-forsaken part of town. During his walk, he noticed a house opposite his own. He caught a glimpse of someone's shadow in the window, but when he tried to get a better look, the figure quickly disappeared behind a thick curtain. Michael decided that it was just a coincidence and did not pay attention to it. However, inside, he had a strange feeling that he was being watched. Strange nights. On the second night, Michael was awakened by some noise outside the window. He looked at his watch. It was about 3 in the morning. The noise was quiet but strange, as if someone was whispering or rustling in the bushes. Going to the window, he saw that people were walking slowly in the street among the shadows of the trees. They were carrying lanterns, which cast a dim light on their figures. But something was wrong. All these people were wearing strange hoods and thick scarves that covered their faces. They moved slowly and quietly, almost without a sound. Michael stood frozen, watching this strange procession. He felt a sense of unease, but he decided not to give in to fear. The next moment, people began to look his way, and he quickly closed the curtains, his heart pounding. He tried to convince himself that these were just locals, perhaps a community with unusual traditions. But his anxiety only grew. Days turned into a nightmare. Over the next few days, Michael noticed his neighbors more and more often. They never came out during the day and only showed up at night. They always wore the same clothes, long coats, hats, or hoods, and always hid their faces. Michael tried to talk to them when one of them passed by his house, but the other just turned his head slightly and quickened his pace. Michael felt uncomfortable. No one wanted to talk to him, and no one showed their faces. He decided to learn more about the area and its strange inhabitants. In the local library, he found an old woman who had worked there almost all her life. She told him about an old cult that had existed in the area many years ago. This cult believed in certain entities that lived in the shadows and could take over people's bodies if they showed their faces at night. To protect themselves from the faceless ones, as they were called, the cult members covered their faces and wore special clothes so that the entities could not recognize them. Growing horror. Michael didn't know what to do with this information. He returned home hoping that it was all just urban legends, but that same night he heard strange sounds again. This time, they were coming from his own yard. Walking to the window, he saw several figures standing on his property. They were looking straight at his house, not moving. Michael's heart sank. He couldn't understand what they wanted, but he could clearly see that they were standing and waiting for something. The next day, he found a note on his door. "Don't try to understand. Leave while you can." The handwriting was illegible, but there was a stain on the paper, as if it had been held in dirty, shaking hands. Michael felt a chill run through his body. He began to notice strange things happening in his house too. Sometimes the doors would close on their own, or he would hear whispers even though no one was around.
Secret invasion. After a few days, Michael could no longer sleep peacefully. He felt that he was being watched not only from outside, but also from inside his house. Every night, hooded men gathered around his house, getting closer and closer. One night, he heard someone trying to open the front door. He jumped out of bed and ran to the door, but when he opened it, no one was there. That same night, he decided not to sleep. He watched the house across the street, the one where he had seen the shadow in the window on the first day. Suddenly, he noticed movement outside the window and realized that someone was looking at him. He decided to go outside and approach the house. But when he got closer, it seemed to him that the people inside the house were hiding, avoiding his gaze. Michael decided to go in. The door was unlocked. There was a musty, moldy smell inside. The house seemed empty, but he knew someone was there. On the second floor, he found a room filled with strange objects, old books, candles, and an old cracked mirror on the wall. Suddenly, he felt a cold air rush through the room and he saw his reflection, but it did not move, although Michael himself was shaking with fear. Suddenly, the mirror cracked, and in its reflection he saw a faceless figure standing right behind him. He turned around, but there was no one there. When he looked at the mirror again, it was shattered. Suddenly, he heard whispers behind him and the sound of footsteps approaching him. The end or the beginning? The next morning, Michael was nowhere to be found in his home. His belongings were still there. The doors were locked, but he was gone. The neighbors continued to act strangely, hiding their faces and only coming out at night. It was said that new residents of the area often disappeared, leaving their homes empty. Since then, whenever anyone passes by Michael's house, they claim to see his shadow in the window, staring at them with empty, faceless eyes. Story 3: Ghost's Revenge. Chapter 1: Moving and New Life. Allison Moore, a single mother who recently lost her job and was in financial trouble, decides to start a new life with her daughter Lily. They move into an old house in a small New England town, which Allison was able to afford due to its surprisingly low price. The house, located on a remote street on the outskirts of town, seems cozy, although in need of repair. The house breathes history. Its walls bear traces of previous eras. The wallpaper is peeling off, the old parquet creaks underfoot, and the spiral staircase makes a menacing creak. From the start, Allison and Lily sense something strange. Lily, an 8-year-old with a vivid imagination, mentions that she can feel the cold air in her room, even with the windows closed. Allison, being a realist, dismisses it. But soon, little oddities begin to occur. Doors slam on their own, lights flicker, and things seem to disappear and reappear in other places. Allison chalks it up to drafts and old wiring, but Lily becomes increasingly concerned. Chapter 2: First Contacts. One night, Lily wakes up from a strange sound, like a whisper. She opens her eyes and sees a faint light in the corner of the room. It seems to her that someone is standing in the shadows. She turns on the lamp, but no one is there. Frightened, Lily runs to her mother's room and tells her what happened. Allison reassures her daughter, thinking that it was just a dream. However, Over the next few days, Lily begins to hear strange sounds more and more often and sees strange spots of light. Finally, one day, she finds a note on her desk, written in a child's handwriting. "Help me." Lily brings a note to her mother. Allison tries to find a logical explanation. Maybe Lily is just imagining it all, since moving to a new home can be stressful for a child. But her anxiety grows when she finds another note, this time in her room. "I'm dead. Help me." Chapter 3. Research and Mysteries. Allison decides to learn more about the history of the house and begins to study old archives at the local library. She learns that the house previously belonged to the Reynolds family, who lived there in the 1940s. Their son, Jacob, disappeared under mysterious circumstances and was presumed dead. The adults were never able to find his body, and the case was closed as an accident. But neighbors whispered that something dark was going on in the Reynolds house. Allison feels that Lily is somehow connected to this long-lost boy. She begins to notice that Lily is spending more and more time in her room, quietly talking to herself. When Allison tries to talk to her, Lily says, "Jacob wants you to hear him." Allison becomes anxious. Chapter 4. Voices from the Past. Lily begins to tell her mother strange details about her new friendship with Jacob. She claims that Jacob tells her about his abusive stepfather, who constantly beat him and kept him locked in the basement. One day, the stepfather killed the boy in a fit of rage and hid his body. Lily begs her mother to go to the basement to help Jacob. Allison, not being too superstitious, decides to go down there anyway to prove to Lily that there is nothing there. But in the basement, she gets scared. She finds old children's things, dusty toys, and a small wooden box. She opens it and finds photos of Jacob, notebooks, and some old children's diary. After reading it, she learns about the cruelty of her stepfather and how Jacob dreamed of salvation every day. Chapter 5. Phantom Signs. After Allison begins to believe that Jacob's spirit is actually present in the house, things get worse. She now hears voices and feels cold touches in the empty room. Lily reveals that Jacob wants them to take revenge on his stepfather. At first, Allison thinks it's all a childish fantasy, but things get out of control when she starts to feel strangled by an invisible force at night. She feels something cold wrap around her neck and hears someone whisper in her ear, "He has to pay." Allison knows that if she doesn't do what Jacob wants, the situation will become much more dangerous. But who should she find? The records don't mention her stepfather's real name, but it's clear to her that he's still alive, out there, and Jacob is out for revenge. Chapter 6. Search for the Guilty One. Allison begins asking around and learns that an old man named Henry, who used to own the Reynolds house, still lives in town. Henry is almost blind and decrepit, but he is still alive. They say that he behaves strangely. Sometimes he screams, as if he is talking to someone invisible. Allison decides to go to him. She finds his house at the end of the street, in the shade of thick trees. When she knocks on the door, she is met by a gloomy old man who at first refuses to talk, but after she mentions Jacob's name, Henry's face turns pale. He begins to shake and tries to throw her out, but she realizes that she has found the culprit. Chapter 7. Confrontation with the Past. That night, Jacob's ghost becomes relentless. He demands that Allison bring Henry to the house. Allison realizes that her life and Lily's are in danger. She decides to confront Henry and bring him to justice. Through threats and persistence, she forces him to come to the house, promising that it will help him get rid of his torment. When they enter the house, Henry begins to cry and beg for mercy. He admits that he killed Jacob in a fit of rage because he could not stand stupid, childish whims. He says that the boy's ghost has haunted him all his life and that he deserves to die. But now, it is too late. Chapter 8. Climax and Purification. When Henry is in the house, everything suddenly becomes dark and cold. Things start falling off the shelves and the walls seem to close in. Jacob appears, but no one sees him, only Lily and Allison. He whispers something in Lily's ear and she repeats, "He wants you to tell the truth that you have repented." Henry screams in horror, realizing that he is about to face inevitable retribution. At that moment, something invisible lifts Henry into the air and his body begins to shake. Allison tries to stop Jacob, begging him to stop, but Lily's cold voice, full of darkness and horror, says, "Now he can't hide." Epilogue. Reconciling with the past. After Henry disappears into the shadows, the house falls silent. Things fall into place again, and silence falls over the house. Lily says Jacob won't come back, but will he leave them? Allison, taking her daughter's hand, decides to leave the house, but realizes that they have changed forever. This experience has taught them that the past should never be forgotten, and that sometimes even the dead need help finding peace.